December 1944. By then, the Western Front was no longer a clean line on a map. It was pressure, constant, grinding, and uneven. Villages collapsed under shell fire. Roads flooded and froze overnight. Forests stood bare and silent, filled with exhausted men moving forward hedge by hedge, mile by mile. As American units pushed through eastern France toward the German border, organized resistance was fading in many places. The war often ended quietly. White flags appeared from shattered windows. Rifles were left leaning in doorways. Hands went up without a word. But not everywhere. Outside a half-destroyed town near the Saar region, an American infantry company halted at the edge of a narrow road lined with leafless trees and burnt-out wagons. Recon patrols had reported a small German rear guard force holding a cluster of stone farm buildings ahead. No artillery fire, no visible movement, just silence. In late 1944, silence rarely meant safety. A squad moved forward cautiously. The men expected either nothing or a quick surrender. Instead, a single rifle shot cracked through the cold air, striking dirt near their boots. Then another, controlled, deliberate. They pulled back immediately. The company commander sent a runner forward for confirmation. The Germans were still there, and someone was clearly in charge. Through binoculars, an American lieutenant caught a brief glimpse of him. He stood in the doorway of the largest building, wearing a long coat, field cap pulled low. A pistol hung at his side. Binoculars rested against his chest. He wasn't shouting orders. He wasn't firing wildly. He was watching. Earlier prisoners had mentioned him in passing. A major, an older officer, a veteran of the Eastern Front, a man who already knew how this would end. A loudspeaker was brought forward. A German-speaking corporal stepped up and delivered the message, clear and by the book. They were surrounded. They should lay down their arms. They would be treated according to the Geneva Convention. There was a pause. Then a single rifle shot rang out, fired straight into the air. Nothing followed. The Americans waited and tried again, louder this time, more explicit. The response came in German, calm, almost polite. The major refused. He stated that he was an officer of the German army. His orders were to delay the enemy. He would not surrender his position. No insults, no bravado, just a statement of fact. The lieutenant lowered his binoculars and looked at the men around him. They were soaked, cold, and exhausted. Some had been moving for nearly 72 hours with almost no rest. No one wanted a firefight over a farm that no longer mattered, but the road did. Higher command was notified. The reply came back quickly. Do not bypass. Do not leave a hostile force in your rear. Resolve it. Mortars were brought forward but kept silent. The company commander hesitated. By late 1944, many officers had learned that force wasn't always the first answer. One more attempt was made. A white cloth was tied to a stick. An American non-commissioned officer, unarmed, walked halfway down the road with his hands visible. He stopped at a safe distance and called out again. This time, the German major stepped fully into view. He did not raise his weapon. He listened. The NCO repeated the surrender terms: medical care, food, warmth, survival. The major answered slowly. He said his men were exhausted. He had no illusions about victory. But surrender, for him, was not merely a tactical decision. It was personal. He had already retreated too far, already given up too much ground. He would not retreat again.
The NCO asked how many men he had. The major did not answer. Instead, he asked a question of his own. "How much time will you give us?" The message was relayed back. After a moment's thought, the company commander made a decision that surprised several of his men. 1 hour. 1 hour to reconsider. 1 hour before the Americans advanced. The order passed quietly down the line. Rifles rested. Mortar crews waited. Time moved slowly. At the 40-minute mark, there was movement. A young German soldier stepped out from a side building, hands raised, shivering from cold or fear. He walked toward the American line and said the major had dismissed him, told him to surrender if he wished. Within minutes, 2 more followed, then another. None were shot. They were searched, wrapped in spare blankets, and led to the rear. At the end of the hour, the major still stood in the doorway. The assault began. It was brief, controlled, and overwhelming. Machine guns suppressed the windows. Mortars fell behind the buildings, cutting off retreat rather than leveling the structures. Infantry advanced in short rushes, using walls and ditches for cover. The Germans fired back weakly. Ammunition was low. Their resistance was symbolic more than effective. Within 15 minutes, it was over. Smoke drifted across the yard. A wounded German soldier called out for help. An American medic moved to him immediately, without waiting for orders. The major was found inside the main building, seated at a wooden table. His pistol lay unloaded beside him. His gloves were placed neatly next to it. He stood when the Americans entered. He did not raise his hands until asked. The lieutenant, muddy and breathing hard, studied him for a moment before speaking through an interpreter. "Why didn't you surrender when you had the chance?" The major answered honestly. He said surrender should be earned, not requested, that an officer's duty was to resist until resistance no longer had meaning, that he wanted his men to see he did not abandon his post lightly. The lieutenant nodded. He had heard explanations like this before. Some made sense, others didn't. The major was searched and escorted outside. What happened next was unexpected. Instead of rough handling or humiliation, he was offered a cigarette. He declined, then accepted. His insignia were left untouched. No one shouted at him. One enlisted man noticed the major's boots were soaked through and quietly pointed him towards a fire barrel where prisoners were warming themselves under guard. The major hesitated, then walked over. Later, during processing, the Americans learned more about him. He had served since before the war. He had lost a son on the Eastern Front. He had no illusions left. That night, he ate the same rations as the American soldiers guarding him. When asked later by an intelligence officer if he regretted refusing to surrender earlier, the major paused. He said he regretted the delay, not the decision. He said the Americans had proven something to him, not by force, but by restraint. In official reports, the incident barely registered. Brief resistance, several prisoners taken, no American casualties. In the scale of World War II, it was nothing. But for the men who were there, it lingered. They remembered the officer who chose resistance even when it no longer changed the outcome. They remembered the choice to wait rather than destroy, to offer time instead of immediate violence. They remembered that surrender, like refusal, was not always about ideology or loyalty. Sometimes it was about dignity. Sometimes it was about how a war ends, not in victory or defeat, but in how two enemies behave when fighting becomes unnecessary. If stories like this matter to you, consider liking the video so they reach more people. Your support helps ensure these moments, often lost in the larger narrative, are not forgotten.